I want to thank you all for coming today, and I want to thank Yumi Goto for choosing my photograph as juror's choice, which is why we're here, because I live here. So I want to thank Damaris Drummond for asking me to speak about my work, as well as the Darkroom Gallery, which provides photographers from all over the world a respectful place in which to exhibit their work. They're also a tremendous resource for the community and to see strong, new fine art photography every month. The image behind me is the holy grail of photographs. It's the first photograph ever made. It was made by a Frenchman, Nicephore Niepce. I actually bumped into it at the University of Texas at Austin. I was backing up, and I bumped into something, and it was like a little room. I went in, and it was there. And it had a gold impressionist frame around it. It was so crazy. Anyway, but what's important is that I'd like you to remember that it was made in 1839. So that's just 175 years ago, which means there have only been about 9 generations of photographers. What I'm going to do today is first show you images from present projects while I tell you a little bit about my own origins, because I think they have everything to do with the work I make. Then I'm going to show images from a large body of work that I've worked on for 40 years. It's called Child's Play. And finally, I'll show you photographers whose work has meant a lot to me. I've tried tying the images to the narrative. Is it playing, Ken?
It changed. It's changed.
Okay, good, good. All right. I was born and educated in New York City. When I was 8 years old, I had what can only be called a vision. I don't usually talk about it, but it actually happened, and I see no reason to hide it. I knew I was going to be an artist. I have a remarkable mother. She saw what art meant to me, and she encouraged me by first making sure I had first-rate art supplies and excellent instructors. When I was 12 years old, I was drawing nude models at the Art Students League. So nudity in fine art is a non-subject for me. It's always been part of my work. I'll be making art for my mother for the rest of my life. When I got to high school, I was accepted into the High School of Music and Art. I'd always wanted to go there because at Music and Art, you took your subjects in the morning, and if you were an art student, you made art all afternoon. We drew, we painted, we made prints. Because of this education, I've always felt comfortable working in multiple medias. I had my first art history course there. And because I lived in New York City, I would go to the museums and look at the art I was studying. I grew up on the best art in the world. I think I had the perfect childhood for an artist, and I'm truly grateful to have had that particular aspect of my childhood, because when I got to college, things were different, and I had a relatively checkered college career. At Carnegie Tech, my first school, the photography department, was not even in the fine arts building, which gives you an idea of the state of photography at that time. It took me 10 years and 3 schools to get my degree, which was handed to me by my 4-year-old son, Eben. In 1970, armed with my Uncle Bob's Rolleiflex camera, I moved to Vermont as a member of the Back to the Land movement. In 1974, without ever having bothered to enroll at Goddard College, I took a good photography course there, taught by Jeff Weiss. And that's where I fell in love with photography. I loved the smells in the darkroom. I thought the chemicals were like alchemy. I loved the meditative rocking of the trays, but like most photographers, what I loved the most was the way the photograph would manifest. It felt like magic to me. And it was there that I discovered I could affect the tones of the print by using my hands to block or concentrate light from the enlarger onto the sensitized paper. So that's what I call drawing with light. Starting with the photograph of my son Eben, we've been looking at photographs from 1974. As I mentioned earlier, these photographs were taken with a Rolleiflex camera. It's a wonderful camera with a magnificent sharp lens. My Uncle Bob brought it back from Germany when he was in the Merchant Marines, so it was part of the family for many years. You held it like this, and you focused by looking down on ground glass, so everything was sort of fuzzy. It had a large square negatives. Oh, I think I'm going too slow. Okay, sorry guys. It had large square negatives, and at the time I was somewhat unfamiliar with the technical parts of the camera. My negatives were usually pretty bad. I think that's why controlling light in the darkroom has always been so important to me. Artistically, mistakes were and still are very important to me. They both interest me visually, and I find them very evocative. I think that by the time I made these pictures, many of my aesthetics and my content were already in place, which is amazing to me. In 1976, I was living quite rurally in central Vermont. I had graduated from Goddard, so I lost the darkroom. My camera was broke, and I was too. I needed to make money, so I started a small company and marketed my fiber work through the American crafts movement. Because I'd always worked in several media, I returned to drawing and sculpture. In 1977 and 1978, I received creation grants from the Vermont Arts Council for graphite drawings in shades of black and gray. It's so interesting to me when you begin to understand what's important and lasting in your work. I can only do this through hindsight. I had no idea at the time how much these drawings had to do with my photographic preoccupation with black and white. Recently, I remembered how as a 12-year-old I treasured a small pastel set that went from black to white in shades of gray. I was fascinated by them. I remember I pet them. And in any respect, I didn't get back into a darkroom until 1989. In 1993, I decided to spend 3 months at the Maine Media Workshops in a residential program devoted to black and white photography. And that's where I really learned to print. I had an inspirational teacher named Brenton Hamilton, and I fell in love with the history of photography there, and which I find endlessly fascinating. As you've seen earlier, I was photographing my son, but I was also photographing my 2 nieces and nephew. And I continued that work when I was in Maine. I've continued to photograph children throughout the years, and I still have 60 rolls of film left to develop. Some of it is 20 years old. Photography is always about time and memory, so I'm excited to finally develop them. The past 3 years, I've been working with 2 young sisters, Anna Rose and Phoebe, and their brother Henry. I am indebted to the children and the parents who have permitted me to do my work throughout these years, and I'm extremely grateful to those children who have been willing to be so present in front of my camera. I feel quite fortunate and honored. I'm a person who has vivid memories of experiences and emotions I had as a child. I want my photographs to be as honest, truthful, and faithful to my memories as is possible. I'd like them to be courageous, not because I think I'm unique, but rather because I think my experiences and emotions were actually quite ordinary and probably universal. As I mentioned earlier, I'm captivated by the story of photography. One thing that tickles me endlessly is that what we call a photograph is actually a frozen optic that exists in nature. The optics that create the image we call a photograph were known as early as 450 BC. This photograph was made with a pinhole camera I built. I photographed with lots of different cameras through the years. What humans brought to the table was the ability to freeze that optic. And remember, that only happened 175 years ago. I think of photography as this gorgeous big tree with multiple branches. So there's nature photography, documentary photography, fine art photography. There are smaller branches that veer off the very large fine art branch, and because there have only been 9 generations of photographers, I can trace my own photographic lineage back at least 3 generations, probably more. I love that. In the 1950s, the Museum of Modern Art was the first museum to treat photography as an art form. In 1967, they mounted an exhibit called New Documents. They showed 3 photographers. The first 2 were Lee Friedlander and Gary Winograd. Both went on to have excellent careers. But to tell you the truth, I was very nonplussed by their work. The third photographer was someone who was unheard of at the time. Her name was Diane Gabriel, and I remember being terribly excited by her work. I found it unflinching and emotionally revealing of both individuals as well as the nation at that time. Arbus is usually known for her photographs of what is sadly called freaks, but those were not the photographs that most intrigued me. Rather, it was the photographs that looked sort of normal. Take this image. While there's nothing overt going on in the picture, you can feel the sad and barren alienation of the couple. I'm glad I'm not their child. I hope some of my pictures have the subtlety that this photograph has. Here's another more overt Arbus photograph. She thought, and I'd agree, that she saw things other people wouldn't notice unless she photographed them. I don't have an example to show you, but Arbus' teacher was Lisette Model, and Arbus' photographs make more sense if you look up Lisette Model on the internet. Here's a very different photographer I admire, Julia Margaret Cameron, who worked in the 1860s. She was criticized because her photographs didn't have sharp focus, which was thought to be important at the time. I find them dramatic, and I think they offer a glimpse into the sublime. Here's a bit of photographic lineage. This photograph is called Damaged Child. It was made in 1936 as part of FDR's New Deal program. The Farm Security Association employed many photographers whose job it was to show rural poverty to the rest of the country. Here's another photograph. This one's from 1984. It's also called Damaged Child. It's a homage, if you will. It's the work of the photographer whose work I greatly admire. Her name is Sally Mann. The work she did with her own children was inspiring in its honesty and emotional depth. And here's my homage from 2014 called Beasting. Beasting. I love seeing these connections in dialogue between image makers. The next slide I'm going to show you was made in 1969 by a photographer also important to me. His name is Emmett Gowan. I forget when I first saw his work, but I was so drawn to it. He is an amazing printmaker. This photograph is called Eggs, and it's from a series he did of his wife's family. Emmett had been a student of Harry Callahan's, who himself was known for the intimate photographs of his wife, Eleanor. And here's my homage, also called Eggs. There have always been women photographers. The first book of photographs was made by Anna Atkins in 1843. It was cyanotypes of British ferns. Cyanotypes produce a print with color of an infinite sky. This is the work of August Sander. He's a German photographer who worked in the early to mid 20th century. The Nazis hated his work because of his honest portrayal of German people, which defied the strict Aryan standard of physical beauty at the time. But you can't look at that photograph without thinking of this photograph, also by Diane Gabriel from 1967. And although I don't have time to show you other of Sander's images, you should know that sometimes they're unsettling in their own right. I want to show you two more of my photographs. This one because, to me, it relates back to the early vision I had as a child. The fact that I was there at that time to take this photograph is beyond my comprehension. But I don't want to close with an image of a monstrous act. Instead, I want to end with this image. As an artist, my work is concerned with birth, death, and everything that happens in between those two poles of human existence. Thank you for letting me share my work with you today. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Lisa.
Curious to know more about the vision you had when you were 5. Can
Well,
you talk about that or?
no, the thing that's so strange about it is I can still see it. I know that there's a little cement divider in between my apartment house and the next apartment house, and someone was standing on it. I can see their legs, and I saw the quality of the light, and all of a sudden I knew that I was going to be an artist. That was it. Yes, Ken?
What is your current process at this point? So you're shooting still with film, or?
No, I have these 60 rolls of film, which I have a bad shoulder, and I have put off developing it for 20 years. But part of that is because it is about time. But what I'm shooting with now, my new favorite thing to shoot with, is an app on my iPhone 4S. And I've done film tests with it. It has a lot of films, virtual films. So I've done film tests, and it has a million lens too. I get a similar look with that than I do to my images that were made with the Holga that I shot with for so many years. So in my elder age, I'm finding it nice to work that way. Yes?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the two images that you have hanging here because they remind me of the Holgas, and so are those, did you filter those in the camera and then?
Those are iPhone images.
And so there was no post-processing after that was?
I use iPhoto, which is a very simplistic program from Apple. It doesn't have the sophistication of Photoshop or Lightroom or anything, but so far it's worked for me.
So you use a Holga app in the iPhone for those?
No, the name of the app is Hipstamatic, which I hate. I can't believe my work is done with this horrible I worked with a Rolleiflex, and now I'm Hipstamatic.
Well, they're lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. Okie doke. So please help yourselves.
I mean, eat all the